What's up, guys, and welcome to Module 8 of the White Coat Compass. This is a big one. This is an important one, and I hope that by the end of this module, you are going to really see that the financial aspect of medical school is doable, it's approachable, it's something you can handle, it's something you can deal with, and it's not something to be scared of, and it's not the hurdle that maybe you thought it was. So let's kind of dive into this right now. We're going to talk about how much medical school actually costs to attend. And we're going to hit something that I kind of briefly touched on, I think, in the last module, where we talked about in state tuition versus out of state tuition and how that can dramatically change the cost of attendance. When you go to medical school, we're going to talk about the hidden costs, like the actual cost of living. We're going to talk about, unexpected events, things that have kind of popped up among my colleagues and my peers that I think are worth noting, things that can happen. A little bit of Murphy's Law, right? We're going to talk about the role of loans, and I want to kind of clear some things up, some misconceptions that I've heard about loans. We're going to talk about special programs, ways to pay for medical school that are kind of unconventional. We're going to talk about the federal ones and then maybe just a couple school specific ones. This is not going to be a comprehensive overview, and I guess this technically isn't either. But this is going to be just to bring your awareness to the fact that there are special programs that are school specific, and that'll put kind of the onus on you to go figure out, based on where you intend to apply to medical school, do the schools you want to apply to have special programs like that. We'll also kind of talk about some of the medical schools that are actually free to attend. And then we're going to talk about how to actually pay to apply to medical school, because a lot of people do cite that is a real impedance to going to medical school. It's like, coming up with the money to apply is tough. And I want to kind of dispel some myths about that and actually show you some different ways to handle this part of it. So let's dive right in. How much does medical school actually cost? And the answer is, well, who knows, right? It varies dramatically based on mainly two things: the location, like which school, because each school has different tuition costs. It's based on private versus public, right? Public institutions tend to have lower tuition for in-state students. And then of course that in-state, out-of-state component is very, very important. I mentioned in the last module that private schools, while they tend to have higher tuition overall, it's uncommon for them to have a different tuition price for in-state students versus out-of-state students, because they're private, they don't care. But public schools, they tend to be cheaper for in-state students, and they tend to be much, much more expensive for out-of-state students. So interestingly enough, a little bit of a figure that I saw is that if you are an out-of-state student, your cost to attend a public institution on average is actually higher than it is to attend a private institution, even though, again, in-state students tend to be able to have cheaper tuition. And then, of course, you have to account for living expenses when you're in medical school. You got to pay rent, you got to pay for gas, you got to pay for health insurance, you got to pay for food. So there's all these other kind of living expenses that are just associated with, living life. So let's look at this little chart right here. This is 2024, 2025, average medical school tuition fees and insurance. So in a public institution, if you are a resident of the state, meaning you're an in-state student, the average cost was $41,869. As a resident of the state of Georgia, it just so happens to be that the cost of attendance, or rather the tuition cost for my state school, is actually a little bit cheaper than that. So that's a pretty good figure. For a private school, a resident of the state, the average is $67,000, or almost $68,000. Now, interestingly enough, private non-resident is basically the same. That was the point that I was trying to make earlier. At a private school, whether you are non-resident or a resident, the figures are about the same. Now, public, if you're a non-resident, $66,355 is kind of the average for 2024 and 2025. So you see here, these figures are all pretty in line with one another, but this figure is a lot lower. So for public schools, in-state students, the cost of tuition is about $42,000 a year on average. Some a little higher, some a little less. So that's what it costs to attend medical school in the United States on average. But again, the averages are just that, they're averages, right? You need to look at specific schools and their specific costs in order to make good decisions about where to apply. Now, this is something very important about loans that is commonly misunderstood. Loans are meant to cover everything, meaning they cover tuition, they cover little fees, but also living expenses. So here's how this works. You have this thing when you go to medical school called the cost of attendance. It includes all of this right here: tuition fees and living expenses. It is determined by your medical school. They make calculations about, what is the average cost of rent in your area, what's the average cost of fuel, the average cost of food, whatever the case is. And they add all of that together, tuition fees and living expenses, to give you a cost of attendance. Now, as of right now, you can borrow loans for up to the full cost of attendance. So in my case, the cost of attendance is about $23,000 per year higher than just the tuition and fees alone. So that difference, that $23,000 extra in the cost of attendance, is meant to be living expenses, right? Paying for rent, paying for gas, food, things like that. Now, obviously, the cost of attendance is higher for cities with an increased cost of living. So if you're in a city where the rent on average is $2,000 a month, more than likely the cost of attendance set by the medical schools in that city is going to be higher, even if the tuition is the same, than in a city where the cost of living might be lower. So that's something you got to keep in mind. Loans also cover the cost for your U.S. medical license exams, step 1 and 2. Step 3, you've actually taken residency most of the time after you graduate from medical school. So loans kind of cover everything, right? They're meant to cover everything. Most people that I attend medical school with are taking out loans for everything, and their cost of living is all covered by these loans. Now, something very obvious based on this is while you cannot, once you start medical school, you cannot control the tuition and fees that you pay. You can kind of control this, right? So it makes sense that if you get roommates, you find a cheaper apartment, you reduce your cost of living, you save more money, and therefore you have to take out less money in loans. And if you take out less money in loans, you've reduced your debt burden, which is always good, right? If you have less money to owe when you finish medical school, that's better. Now, I want to bring up something very important, a change that occurred in 2025 with this so-called One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed by the United States legislators in July 4th of 2025. This law changed the federal student loan limits. And as of right now, there is a $50,000 per year federal student loan limit and a $200,000 per year lifetime cap. Now, you may be kind of thinking to yourself, wait a second, man, this number right here is awfully close to $50,000 per year. If I do that by times four, which gives me the 4 years of medical school, I'm at like $168,000. That only leaves like $32,000 in additional loans that I can take out over the course of 4 years. You can't live on $32,000 for 4 years. That doesn't make any sense. It's impossible. So there's some obvious challenges that are created by this One Big Beautiful Bill, so-called, that may impede a lot of students from being able to access the full cost of attendance as set by their medical school. And this is something that is happening currently. It's an active process. There may be some changes that occur to this. I know that there are some advocacy organizations like the American College of Physicians who are currently working with Congress to try to make exemptions for medical students, for professional students. As you know, the doctor shortage in the United States is already bad. This is going to make it worse unless changes are made. So just be aware of this. Keep it in the back of your mind. It is something I think to consider as you move forward in this process. Now, I want to talk about, there are ways to get medical school paid for that do not involve loans or involve fewer loans that are sometimes considered unconventional but should be considered nonetheless. Now, the first one is the HPSP, the Health Professions Service Program, Scholarship Program. This is a military program. Did I spell that right? Military, something like that. For the Army, Navy, and Air Force, or the so-called Chair Force, as I like to call it. What this program is it is a program that pays your medical school tuition and fees in their entirety, so you have no debt there, and then they also pay you $2,999 per month as of 2025 with an additional $20,000 sign-on. Now, this is pre-tax, and the $20,000 sign-on bonus is broken up into multiple payments, so you don't get it all up front. But nonetheless, pre-tax, you get $3,000 a month and a $20,000 sign-on bonus, in addition to having your fees paid. I have a couple friends who utilized this program. What they're going to do is after they finish residency, they're going to have a 4-year active duty service commitment. So they'll join the military. They'll be in the Army, Navy, or Air Force as a commissioned officer, which is really, really cool. Uh, One of the things to be considerate of here is that you almost always end up doing a military residency. The military has their own residencies. And some people think of this as a good thing. Some people think of this as a not good thing. I am not a part of this program, so I can't speak to whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. The problem I think that most people are concerned about is it kind of limits sometimes what specialties you're able to do, because the military is going to want you to pick specialties that they need. And so, if you want to do something kind of obscure and the military doesn't need that, it may be more difficult to match into that residency. And then something really important to consider is that once you're actually in the military and doing your 4 years, military physician pay is usually lower than civilian pay by a lot, right? So we looked at, kind of what doctors get paid, I think, in our first module. And, let's just pull a random number off of that chart. I think anesthesiologists get paid on average $523,000 per year in the United States. A military anesthesiologist is going to be much, much lower than that, because military compensation is based on your rank and years of service, not your job, right? The job that you do doesn't matter. The rank you have and the years of service that you've incurred does matter. So, cool program up front. It definitely relieves a lot of stress associated with money on the front end while you're in medical school. You'll spend 4 years just kind of cruising on by because you got $3,000 a month coming in, minus taxes, and you got a $20,000 sign-on bonus. But once you're out and actually doing your job, you got to recognize that, your friends who did not do the military route, they're going to be making a lot more money depending on the specialty in question. Now, you can imagine that for specialties that pay on average less, family medicine, pediatrics, general internal medicine, those kind of things, this makes more sense because, again, regardless of your specialty, the specialty that you want to go into, military pay is going to be based on rank and years of service. So now if you want to be a neurosurgeon, maybe this is not the best program for you because you're going to spend 4 years of your life at a much, 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 much lower salary in the military versus in the civilian world. But if you want to be a pediatrician, a family medicine doctor, things like that, this program starts to make a little bit more sense on paper and just in terms of the math, just in terms of the finances of it. So that's worth looking into. Now, the other program, the NHSE, the National Health Services Corps, is a program that is designed to get doctors into either rural or underserved areas in the United States. Now, it's kind of an interesting program. They do pay your tuition and fees, just like the HPSP. They give you a stipend. There's no sign-on bonus, and the stipend is like close to half of what the military does, $1,631 a month. And you're like, well, that's probably not going to cover my rent and food and gas and all that, right? So most people find that there is a little bit of kind of you need to take out a couple loans, a little bit in loans to kind of cover the difference between this and what it actually costs to live. This is pre-tax as well, so you can expect to lose some of that to taxes. But again, it pays for tuition and fees, so you would graduate debt-free. There is a year-for-year service requirement in a qualifying area, so the federal government kind of gets to decide where they need you, and they give you options. They'll say, hey, we need you here, 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 and you can kind of pick from those is basically how it works. There are some that require special approval, and then some that are just guaranteed up front. I'll give you an example of one that's guaranteed up front. That's prisons. If you want to take a job in a prison, which is an amazing, incredible way to do medicine, then you are guaranteed to be able to take that job at that prison as a doctor, and it qualifies for this, year for year service requirement. What does year for year mean? It just means for every year you receive the scholarship, you have to give them a year of service. Here's a big catch. Only primary care specialties qualify. General OBGYN, family medicine, general internal medicine, pediatrics. You get the idea. So that's worth looking into as well. Again, you can graduate basically debt-free or pretty close to it, but there are some requirements that you have to consider. Does it make sense for you based on what you want to do and where you want to do it? Now, something to consider is that most people change their chosen specialty. Like when I started medical school, I wanted to be a cardiologist. Now I'm kind of thinking in a different direction, right? Many, many people make changes to their intended profession as they move forward in the process. So you got to keep in mind, if you want to be a primary care doctor right now, there may come a time in medical school, or even in college, late college, where you decide, I want to do something different based on what I know about it. And likewise, if you want to be a neurosurgeon right now, there's nothing to say that you might wake up one day and, you may want to be a family medicine doctor. So don't rule these things in or out based on that. But if you know for a fact that it's like, I'm either going to be a primary care physician or I'm not going to medical school. If that's you, okay, these start to make a little bit more sense, right? Now let's continue on. The VA, the Veterans Affairs, the um, Department of Veterans Affairs, has their own version of the HPSP. Now, likewise, it pays full tuition and fees at your medical school. They give you a $1,328 per month stipend with no bonus. However, they allow you to do a civilian residency. And then technically, when you're working at the VA, which is what they require, you're a civilian. You're working with people who are or have been in the military, but you are a civilian. And therefore, your compensation is much higher typically than it is if you're in the military. However, it is still a little bit lower than civilian pay. Well, I shouldn't say civilian pay, but let's say private sector pay for the same job, right? So the other catch to this is that it is a 1.5-year service commitment for every year that you receive the scholarship. So if you receive the scholarship for 4 years, you're going to owe them 6 years of service. But again, you're a civilian, you do a civilian residency, and you are getting paid like a civilian, although because you're working in the government sector instead of the private sector, your pay might be just a little bit lower. So it's worth looking into, that. Now, there's another interesting program. This is a different kind of program, a little bit unique. It's called the MDSSP, the Medical and Dental Student Stipend Program. Now, this is a military program. So what it is they give you $3,000 a month, but it's just stipend. They don't actually pay your tuition or fees. So you would still have to probably take out loans for tuition and fees, although you could get your living expenses covered. So what this is really designed to do is just decrease your debt burden. Interestingly enough, though, when you do this program, your commitment is to the military reserves, not the active duty. So military reservists, they typically do 1 weekend per month on some kind of drill, and then 2 weeks out of the summer on some kind of drill. There's, it varies a little bit, but that's kind of the general rule of thumb. But the main thing is that you're a civilian. You do a civilian residency. You have a civilian job, your 9-to-5 doctor job or whatever is a civilian job, but you're in the military reserve, so you're kind of straddling both lines, right? You get the benefits of being a military doctor, but the benefits of being a civilian doctor, and you can choose any specialty. They don't really care what you do. The other catch to this, perhaps, is that there's a 2-for-1 service commitment, meaning for every year that you receive this stipend, you owe them 2 years of service. So I've got a friend who's doing this. They think it's awesome to be able to be both a civilian doctor and a military doctor and to pick their own specialty. They're still going to have some debt, but life is a lot easier for them in medical school because they've got some money coming in and they're not just living on loans. So that's kind of it for the main meat and potatoes federal programs. There may be some other programs out there, some state-specific programs, for example, for debt repayment. But in terms of getting medical school paid for or getting money in medical school, these are kind of the main core programs. Now, let's talk about some so-called school-specific or institutional special programs. The first thing you should know right off the bat is that some medical schools are actually free to attend. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a few that I knew right off the top of my head. NYU, Cleveland Clinic Lerner, Albert Einstein, Johns Hopkins. NYU is in New York City. Cleveland Clinic is in Cleveland, Ohio. Albert Einstein is in Bronx, New York City. Johns Hopkins is in Baltimore, Maryland. Needless to say, these are some of the most competitive medical schools in the country. If you go look up NYU's median MCAT, median GPA, you'll find that it's at the absolute upper echelon of what's even possible. And I'm certain that the same is true for these as well. Why? Well, because obviously when medical school is free, they're able to attract, kind of the most competitive students. So this is not something that I think most people should count on. I mean, most people can't count on it because between these 4 schools alone, there's only, 600 or 700 seats. And when there's, thousands and thousands and thousands of medical students across the country, it goes without saying that most of them are not going to attend one of these 4 schools. So look into that, be aware of it, but just know that these are very, very competitive schools. Now, maybe the more important thing is that a lot of schools have their own kind of specific scholarship programs. For example, the Mercer University School of Medicine in Georgia has kind of 2 programs that they do. One of them is called the Nathan Deal Scholarship, and that's basically a thing where if you do a primary care residency, family medicine, internal medicine, general surgery, and you commit to practicing medicine in a rural county in Georgia for 4 years after residency, then they will pay roughly 85% of your tuition and fees. You're still kind of on the hook for your living expenses, but hey, that's a pretty cool program. Similarly, they have something called the Accelerated Care Track, and this program is interesting because it actually reduces the length of your medical degree from 4 years to 3 years. So you get out a year sooner, and they only make you pay for one of those years. So you pay for the first year, they pay for the second and third years, and Another cool benefit to this program is they pre-match you into a local residency as early as the summer of your first year of medical school. So you kind of know where you're going to residency. You actually cut your cost of medical school down by 75%, and you're still going to be on the hook for living expenses, but it's still a cool program that'll dramatically reduce your debt burden if you end up at the Mercer School of Medicine. Other schools that have similar programs, Indiana University, University of Arizona, Geisinger Commonwealth, these are schools that have similar programs, right? Now, there's one common thread between all these programs, from what I can tell, is that they tend to be primary care specific. Almost every state in the US has a shortage of primary care doctors. And the medical schools want to compel their students to go into those primary care specialties, whatever they may be. And so these programs tend to only exist for the primary care specialties. If you want to be a neurosurgeon, or you want to be, a cardiothoracic surgeon, or you want to be something else, you're probably going to be on the hook for your own medical school costs. These programs are probably generally not going to apply to you, but it's worth looking at. And I think a good tool to kind of look into these things is just use ChatGPT to kind of say, hey, compile me a list of medical schools that have special scholarship programs. Maybe there's programs for people with financial need. Maybe there's programs for people who want to do specific specialties that are not primary care. The list goes on and on and on. So something you should be aware of is that the AMCAS application for MD schools, the American Medical College Application Service, charges you for every application that you send, meaning every school that gets your application costs money. They charge you $175 for the first application, and they charge you $47 for every subsequent application. Now, many students apply to 15 to 20 medical schools. So just doing the math, if we apply to 15 schools, that's 14 times 47 and 1 times 175. Add those together, we get 833. 15 medical schools cost at least $833 to apply to. In addition to that, almost every medical school in the country has something that they call a secondary application. Usually it's just a couple essays you got to answer, some odds and ends, paperwork you got to fill out, but it costs to submit it because medical schools make money on these applications and they like it. So these secondary applications run anywhere from $50 to $175 per application. When you tack that onto this, multiply by 15, you're like, oh my gosh, I could be spending upwards of $1,500, $2,000, $2,500 to apply to medical school. And so for that reason, I encourage people, start saving. If you can just save $10 a week, $15 a week, $20 a week, you're going to be way ahead of the curve, especially if you start early. I mean, $10 a week is $520 per year. For that reason, if you fail to prepare, you prepare to fail. Now, what's the way around this? Well, we're going to talk about this guy right here, Fee Assistance Program. Not everyone qualifies, but if you do, it is a no-brainer. You should use it. We talked about this program briefly in other modules, but we are going to talk about it in detail right now. So what is the Fee Assistance Program? Well, it's a program offered by the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges, the same guys that own that so-called AMCAS application. They own the MCAT, all that mess. This program, if you receive it, cuts the cost of your MCAT in half, down to $160 or so, whatever it is. They give you 20 free applications to medical school. And then on top of that, almost every medical school in the country will waive their secondary application fee if you are a Fee Assistance Program recipient. This can drop the cost of applying to medical school down essentially to zero if you apply to 20 or fewer medical schools. Of course, you'll still be on the hook for half of your MCAT fee, but that's okay. In addition to this, though, a Fee Assistance Program recipient also gets a lot of free MCAT prep from the AAMC. That's great. Now in 2024, the AAMC expanded the Fee Assistance Program to cover residency applications. This is not something for you to have to worry about right now, but they will give you 50 free residency applications when you are in your 4th year of medical school if you received the Fee Assistance Program when you were a pre-medical student. So how does this program work? How do you know if you qualify? Well, if you go to the Fee Assistance Program website, you will find this chart. This is only a small portion of the chart. But the way this works is you identify your family size. If your family just consists of you, great. If your family consists of you and mom, great. If your family consists of you, mom and dad, great. If your family consists of you, mom and dad, and a sibling, great. You get the idea. You calculate the number of people in your household. Then you look at this figure based on the number of people that are in your household. Let's say it's you, mom, and dad. The figure is $103,000. So if between the three of you, you guys make less than $103,000. You qualify for fee assistance program. So this program is awesome. A lot of people do qualify for it. And if you qualify for it, you should apply for it. Ultimately, it's going to save you a lot of money if you qualify. And it just requires submitting some paperwork regarding your parents' taxes, your taxes, things like that. It's a really awesome program. So I encourage you, apply for it if you qualify, and go look at this in detail to make sure that you do or do not qualify. It is not something you want to pass up if you are eligible for it. So we covered all this. Start saving early if you do not qualify for the fee assistance program. If you need to ask mom and dad for money, grandma, grandpa for money when the time comes, so be it. But just be advised, this is what it costs to apply to medical school. That's it, guys. That is everything about paying for medical school, paying to apply to medical school. I hope this module was informative and helpful, and I hope you now see that you can do it, you can manage it, you can handle it. And with that, we'll see you in the next module.